Going to bring up our chat window. Hello everyone, hope you're doing really well today, these crazy times. Hopefully you're staying healthy, all friends and family. Super hard to focus on work stuff right now, I know that. But, you know, here we are. We're going to hopefully work on some cool After Effects stuff today. And yeah, so let's see. Ian says, excited to say I don't ever recall watching your tutorials. Hopefully I don't let you down. Ian, welcome everyone, welcome. If you're on YouTube, grab that link and go on over to MoGraph Mentor, where we have this really simple chat. You shouldn't have to register for anything, just put in a name and you should be able to jump directly into the chat stream there. And we're gonna jump in, I promise, really quickly here. I am just going to make sure that everything is working. If there's any issue with audio, anything like that, please feel free to chime in. Hey everyone, hey. Greetings from Mexico, welcome from Mexico. I'm here in Sarasota, Florida, so maybe our weather is a little bit similar. Welcome, see people coming into the chat. Good stuff. So nobody's telling me the audio is bad, so let's just dive in. Welcome everybody, here we are, March, total craziness. We're gonna try to keep this to an hour. Our good friends at School of Motion have a big town hall at 3 o'clock where they're gonna just, I think, talk a little bit about everything that's going on in the world, the economy, industry. I think that's a great idea. Hats off to them. So let's sneak in this 1 hour of After Effects so people are free to go hang out with the School of Motion team for their town hall. We're kicking off what I'm calling After Effects Foundations. This is going to replace some of the free introductory training that we have on mographmentor.com. It's long overdue. And, you know, the idea is After Effects is this massive program. And I'm not saying learn the whole program in 7 days. I'm saying learn the basics. There's a lot of stuff as a motion designer that's really repetitive with After Effects, whether you're doing that kind of 2D work, shape layers stuff, even all the way to compositing, the faux 3D and After Effects, that 2.5D as we call it. So we're trying to put together a really jam-packed free After Effects kind of kickstart training where you can do your first 7 projects, you know, kind of one a day, and just get your bearings on a lot of this if you're new to After Effects. So as I said, shape layers. The idea of mats and masking is really important. We'll talk about that. Trim paths are obviously very important. Animating shape layers is super important. I want to talk about transitions, especially today. Transitions, I'm saying AKA Michael's low budget explainer cheat sheet. I've done so much 2D animation work. I really found myself, and especially on lower budgets, like sub $10,000 budgets, I was coming back to a lot of the same things kind of over and over because there's that constraint of time. There's not enough money to build a huge team. So it's hard to build out super duper innovative transitions. You come back to a lot of the same principles, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about distortion effects broadly. The idea that you can get procedural motion out of your flat artwork, things like turbulence and wave warping. There's a lot of uses for this kind of stuff. Also just roughening up and giving your flat artwork a little bit more personality or tooth, or that kind of handmade feeling. We are going to talk about playback rates, which is not a distortion effect, but it's kind of this idea of how the animation is perceived. We're not going to get to it all today, but in the next session, we are going to talk about this 2.5D, 1-node versus 2-node cameras, faking light source in depth. If you see this image here on the bottom right, and I'm a little bit obscuring it with my window here, but this is a design that is ripped off from my friends over at Ordinary Folk. They had a shot in one of their pieces that looked just like this, but I was watching it and I was looking for examples that we could recreate, and I just said, this is the perfect example of like understanding this faux depth, faux light source kind of shot. So we are going to kind of break down, I think, how they did that. Compositing 3D basics, we will take some 3D renders that I put together and talk a little bit about simple compositing stuff that everybody needs to know. And then 2D simple rigs. This is obviously a deeper, well to go into character animation and After Effects, but there's a lot of stuff you can do right out of the box without buying people's rigging tools or rigging packages. There's a lot you can do just being intentional with your shapes and just applying some animation principles. We'll come back to transitions and this example that we have. That's going to be the second thing we look at. For now, we are going to start with this eye animation. So I'm going to tab over to After Effects. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, and this is less than 2 seconds, and I'm going to Control 0 to get a little playback so you can see what we're going to make together. And this has become a really popular trope of an animation in After Effects. This idea of like taking other shapes and making an eye. The eye is obviously a really important symbol in all of visual art. So you see it a ton in motion design. And you see this kind of shot a lot. And it's actually really easy to put together. And if you're new to After Effects, it's kind of nice and important to understand exactly how this works. So one last check. Greetings, great state of New Jersey. Oh, Rob, please stay healthy up there. I'm seeing it big time in the Northeast, Rob. Thank you, Matt. AudioWorks at Calgary, Buenos Aires. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to hang out with us a little bit today. So let's break down this animation, and then let's see how quickly we can rebuild it. So essentially, we have these two tiny circles, and I've named everything, and we are going to make these files available for you to download. Not today, but we're getting together the whole After Effects Foundation backend course. And essentially, if we just solo the green and the purple, and I hit U to toggle down the layers, you see I have a position and a scale animation on these two, and I'm basically just scaling them up and positioning them to overlap. Now, the fact that they're both rotating and changing, is that we have both of those layers parented to a null object that I have labeled here anim scale rotation. So if I hit U on that layer, you'll see I also have a scale and rotation controlling both of them together. So we have two layers of animation there. And all we really did was duplicate our purple layer, turn the color white, and then apply a set matte. And then the set matte is this great tool that allows us to take kind of an alpha matte from any other channel, any other layer that we designate, right? And so we just simply designated that the green layer reveals the white layer. So as I inch through this, hopefully you can understand that concept. The green reveals the white, but that white is its own layer, and then the pupil is just sitting in there. It just scales up and it's parented. So super simple to understand. Let's go ahead and recreate this. And we only need really about 3 seconds. 1920, 1080 square pixels, frame rate of 24. That all sounds good. First thing I'm going to do is hit Command Y to create a background layer. And I don't really care what color it is, because the first thing I want to do is come up here to Effect, Generate Gradient Ramp. And I was having some fun with my gradients, and I'm going to do everything here kind of on a diagonal angle, and we can have some fun with the colors here. I am very much loving, and you can kind of see it in MoGraph Mentor, I'm very much loving these pink and purples. Instead of orange, let's push that more to a purple. I think that's kind of nice. I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate that. I'm going to name the first one BG, and I'm going to name this one BG Border. And what I'm going to do is simply come up to my gradient ramp and hit Swap Colors. So it's just going to swap the colors. Then I'm going to come up to my mask panel here, and I'm just going to double click a mask. And what that's going to do is apply a mask exactly to the size of my layer, my BG border layer. And then under expansion, I'm going to come in here and find an amount that looks good. I'm just building a border here. And this is some fun I'm having right now playing with these kind of flipped gradients here. So mask expansion, let's just call it an even, and -100, just for good measure. So that kind of sets up my scene like so. Now I'm going to come back to my shape layers panel up here, grab an ellipse. I'm going to turn on my title and action safe just to give myself a cursor there. I'm going to come right to the center and create a pretty small circle. And let me remind myself that, excuse me, I was just using gradient fill on the shape layer, so that's a good example as well. So the shape layer has, just like in Illustrator, it has a fill and a stroke. And if I actually click on the word fill, I can use a gradient fill with a linear gradient or a radial gradient there. So I'm going to choose linear because I do want this to have a gradient. And if you can see, it actually created these handles. So now I have these handles. And again, I want to keep everything kind of diagonal because that's sort of what we're doing with the piece. And then if I come over here and toggle down this gradient fill, I have an edit gradient. It'll bring up the same kind of color panel here. And let's choose some complementary colors since we have all this purple. Let's actually make that green a little bit darker. So green is across the color wheel. Let's make that a little more green and a little darker like so. Green is opposite purple, pink, the color wheel. So green we know is going to work for us. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. Hit UU to toggle down all the options. And this will be our second gradient here. And let's choose something like a blue to a little bit more of a teal. So maybe this blue could be a little bit more blue. So now I need to separate these out and kind of get to our starting position. So I'm going to hold Shift and use my keypad arrows. And if you hold Shift, I believe it moves 10 pixels, as opposed to just if you hit the arrow once, it moves 1 pixel. If you hold Shift, it goes 10. So I want to space these evenly. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from the center. Grab this one, hold Shift, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from the center. Those are now kind of equidistant. I actually want to go a little further than that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's go another 100 pixels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So those are equidistant from the center. Now, we could certainly work on our colors. I'm going to go to full resolution here. Hopefully that doesn't slow down the stream at all. Did you put some texture on that shapes? There's no texture on the shapes, but I do have a noise affecting the whole scene. I always add some kind of noise or grain over 2D artwork like this, because to me it just doesn't look finished. If it's just totally... to me, it doesn't look like a film. So I very much have a preference towards anything that simulates kind of a film aesthetic. So I do add noise quite a bit to work like this. So we're pretty set up here. So we'll call this, let's just label them green. Learn to spell blue. Then I'm going to create a null object that's going to sit right in the center. And as we said, we're just going to parent both of those to the null. So I'm going to hit S, lay a keyframe for scale. I'm going to hit P and add a position. Then I'm going to hit U. I'm going to select both, hit U once. It should just toggle any properties that have a keyframe. I'm going to go forward 1 second, and we may have to adjust that. But let's actually bring back our title and action safe because I want them to merge really just as perfectly as possible. So let's go there. Well, actually, you know what we need to do first? scale this up to something like 400. Same for this guy, something like 400. And now I'm just looking at my shape in the center, right? If you can't see the outlines, the toggle mask and shape path visibility, that's this setting here. So I want to see those lines because we want to build our eye. And so that's looking pretty perfect to me. And so these are linear interpolation, so I'm going to easy ease these. And this is pretty simple. Simple ease in, ease out. So let's go ahead and push that. And Control 0. Yeah, it should just feel like they kind of speed up and come in the middle. The other thing we can do is if you wanted these to start smaller, now that we have our keyframes in, oops, right, these could be down at like 50%, let's say. Even smaller, so it gets a little bit more dramatic. And then up to 400%. Now that's not quite as big as we're going to need it, but this is where the null object comes in with a rotation and a scale. So I'm going to hit U again. I'm going to start that rotation and scale at 0. And then when we get here, we do want our eye to kind of appear this way. So that's just plus 90 degrees. And we want the eye to be pretty big. So we're kind of coming in here. So I'm also going to scale that up. So now we've got 2 layers of animation working. And we're going to need to actually match. So I'm going to grab all our keyframes, easy ease again, and come back and redo that. Probably should have done that first. We don't want people to really feel the difference between the null, right? Like it should all feel kind of apart, right? It should feel like one piece. And so you can see we're getting the basis of our animation there. So from here, let's grab our green layer, hit Command D to duplicate. I'll rename it white. I'll come back to the fill and just choose a normal fill, and it's already selected white, but you can always click the color and just define the color of that, right? So now we need to go Effect, Channel, Set Matte. And now, again, this is basically going to tell this layer to take another layer and treat it like an alpha mask, right? An alpha matte, something that's going to reveal it. And we know that we want it to be revealed by the blue layer. So we've got everything named, so we can just hit blue. And then we are going to make sure that our stack order is correct, right? If we want the white to be to reveal, we're going to have to put it at the top of the stack there. So you can see in about 10 minutes, we can set up this animation pretty quickly. And so the very last thing I would do is come in here and let's make our pupil. And so we need to make that pure black. Let's just keep everything really stark and simple. Let's just create a scale animation. And we'll offset it ever so slightly. Before I animate it down, I am going to parent it to the null. So it actually will rotate and scale. Now we need to give it its own scale animation, right? Because that's no good. We actually need it to be 0 there and grow. And it can offset a little, but the important thing here is that it also feel like it's part of the arc of our animation, if that makes sense. So I don't really want to ease it in. It should actually be pretty fast, and it should just ease in mostly to the end, right? Because by this point in the animation, we're easing that arc, right? If we think about everything happening within this 1.5 seconds, it's like one big arc of velocity up near the middle. So for the pupil, we want them to kind of pop on, be fast, because it's through that arc of the animation. So that's something I try to think about a lot. And then we can determine if we like that offset, if we like that size. Maybe our pupil, maybe the client wants it a little bigger, let's say. And it's offset a little bit. Sometimes just even a little offset is good, but it still feels like it's kind of all a part of a piece. And if we just line it up exactly, sometimes that's going to look better. And I think maybe it does look a little bit better. Watching this while doing the Ben Marriott class. Yeah, Ben Marriott. Love that guy. Incredible, incredible work from Ben. Hoping I can connect with him a little bit more, but so grateful to Ben for all the knowledge that he's dropping on us. His work is really beautiful. So something else I did in the original, which gets us into a nice discussion of kind of some secondary elements, is there's so many, the core of this is these circles. And I like how I'm contrasting. Let's unsolo everything. I felt like we could frame the space even a little bit better with this animation right here, with this line animation that follows kind of the rectangles of the border that we created. Oh, excuse me. And I'm becoming a bit of a border nut. I'm kind of putting a border on everything, and I'm not sorry. Just like it. So that's really easy to do. Let's come in here. I've just got my rectangle shape layer selected. I do have my title action safe, so I can see, kind of center it there. Can make my spacing kind of uniform. That looks pretty good. So for fill, I'm going to strike it, say none, no fill, yes please on a stroke. And again, with the stroke, we could have a linear gradient, a radial gradient, just for fun. Oh, it didn't like that. We'll keep it a solid color. Uh-oh. I'm not sure what that error is. I'm going to have to Google that. Oh, yeah. Every time you update After Effects, it's becoming a thing. It's really becoming a thing. So let's say 6 pixels on that. I think it's looking a little big. So I'm going to come into my rectangle path, unlink the size, and just pull that in a little bit, maybe to those lines, maybe to just the edge of that interior title safe. I don't want it to be too close, right? I don't want the spacing of the border. I don't want this to feel like tighter than the spacing of the edge. So let's keep that consistent. That might be a nice visual structure. This can also help me see my positioning of my central focal point in the scene. Like I'm starting to feel like it's sitting up a little bit higher. And then it's a good question of, do I have this exactly centered? And you can always hit Command R to bring up your ruler and pull in a guide just to make sure it's exactly center. So I was centered and I was pushing that away. Command semicolon to get rid of the guide layer, Command R to get rid of the ruler. We can pull back the title and action safe. Now, I was having fun determining kind of what was in front of what. On my first pass, I had the box behind, but I think it could make a case. It kind of looks cool as this other element that can maybe sit on top. So very simply, under this shape layer, we'll call this box, just so it's super clear. And we will add a trim paths. Trim paths just means we get this, these controllers here, start and end. So this is where we always get to determine the starting point of our animation, and we can offset that. And I think I'd like it to start right there in the center. So I'm going to use my offset. I want it to come right from that point and then end at the top. So I'm going to take that to 0 on the end. I'm going to move that back. And for right now, let's just assume it's all synced up. So I'll take that back to 0, and then I'll take it to 100. Excuse me, I'll take it to 100. I'm going to grab those, Control click, easy ease. And there's many plugins and scripts. I actually just bought a new computer and I don't have all my scripts set up, but there's definitely some scripts to just automate this kind of easing that are definitely worth looking into if you're doing this all the time. So I think it looks pretty okay, all synced up as such. The thing for me always about trim paths is I hate how that point at the very top looks like it's just stuck in space. To me, that's like a drag on the eye a little bit, and it just feels kind of cheap or something. So for my money, I like to animate that offset. Oops, I just want to animate the offset. So I'm going to move that first offset position and I'm going to pull it back a little bit. Just pull it back a little bit. Let's do a default ease, and let's see. So I like it to feel like it's moving. Now that looks like junk. So let's actually take it all the way out. Excuse me. That's something that I typically do quite a bit. I never want to see a static point on the line, so I'm very typically having an offset animation, even though generally, like, I want the starting focal point to be the top and loop around, almost like it's wrapping around the center of what the audience should be looking at. I'm typically always adding an offset there, so that is really the extent, right, of the trim paths, the start and the offset, and I use that quite a bit. Obviously good for circles, rectangles, and then more organic shapes, which we'll talk about later, and all the fun that you can have there. So we're almost done with this animation. Now, as I mentioned before, to me, this kind of work looks okay, but to my eye, to me, this kind of vector art just feels incomplete. So let's go ahead and add an adjustment layer. I'm just going to control click and add an adjustment layer. This new Mac Pro keyboard is so thin in its profile. My typos are up considerably. So let's come down to noise and grain and add some noise. And let's go over the top first and say 10%, because hopefully you can see it. And what that is going to do, if I just toggle it on and off, make this a little bigger, it's just going to add a little bit of noise, just a little bit of that TV fuzz, but much finer, right? Not like blocky pixels, but like very, 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 very fine noise. And we can say use colored noise or not. We have a lot of color in the scene, so I will say colored noise. And then typically I'm going to pull that back to like something like 5%. And to me, that helps all the 2D artwork, vector artwork, sharp edges just sit in the scene a little better. Just a personal aesthetic thing, perhaps. I'm going to grab a new adjustment layer. And this time, I'm going to go to time and posterize time. And somebody mentioned Ben Marriott, and I know Ben loves this too. I am absolutely in love with this effect, because at 24 frames per second, I think it looks pretty good. But if we actually take this to 12 and we make the whole composition, we make the whole scene, oops. Did I make a new shape layer? Oh, I'm a dummy. Excuse me, guys, sorry. Not a shape layer, an adjustment layer. And I'll call it 12 FPS because I just want to go effect posterize time 12. And it might be hard to see through the stream because of whatever frame rate this is streaming to the internet, but it just looks choppier. You can see the stutter that you traditionally see in traditional animation. And to me, it's such a pleasing aesthetic to get that little bit of choppiness. Perhaps I'm just so saturated in like 60 frames per second apps. I don't know what it is, but this 12 FPS to me is just like, it's just magic. I love, love, love the look of stuff that just has that little bit of choppiness, even though we're using keyframes and things can look really smooth, you know, as opposed to if we crank this to 60 frames per second, it's going to feel like something from an iPhone app, something from an iPad app, you know, something on your computer that has this extremely high refresh rate. There's no, you know, there's no choppiness. Everything looks extremely smooth. You know, perhaps it's all a part of like the noise and the 12 frames per second that I think can give you just a charming, more beat up look. So I'm a big fan. I know it's becoming quite popular, but for my money, I just really, really, really like it. So there we have it. That is our set matte animation. The big takeaway, I think, is this technique of the set matte and understanding how we can kind of layer animations together, and we could change all these colors. The very last thing I did on the previous animation was I wanted the scene to feel a little bit more alive. I'm always looking for ways to just add a little bit more movement, even if it's extremely subtle. So the fact that we can animate the gradient ramp, I think is really fun. So let's just take a look at our background. So I set 2 keyframes. If I hit U, I set keyframes for, I put them on the wrong layer actually. We actually don't want to change the color. We want the start and the end of the ramp to be keyframed because we actually want to change the position. I'll go to the end of the animation and let's just move these. So it was going diagonal. I guess we need to push that a little bit more. We'll kind of just do a rotational and you'll see what I mean. So that's no good. We don't want them to pull in so much. So let's pull those out. So we'll do that animation there, and it looks like excuse me. So that's the center. So we can do the same thing for the background. Start of ramp, end of ramp, hit U, see those keyframes. Come to the end of this animation. Now what I don't want to do, I almost need to follow the other animation because the whole idea is I just want to see these difference on the corners, right? And it starts to blend here, which I'm kind of okay with. But you see now we've got all the gradients animating, and that's going to be really subtle. That's just something that's like seen, that's like felt but hardly seen. Like you're not going to really get a ton out of that, but for me, it makes the scene feel just a little bit more alive. And if this was for a client that was going to post something on YouTube, I probably would add a little bit of a vignette. I would probably come in here with the curves, just grab my master RGB and darken that up, come into an ellipse, double click, subtract, hit F to feather that gradient. And I probably would add a little bit of contrast to the corners just to try to, once it gets compressed down to H.264 and it's uploaded to YouTube, Facebook, and it goes through another round, you can really start to lose a lot of that contrast. So I do find myself almost overdoing it on the contrast in After Effects, especially if it's going to be right. It's not going to like sit on a Vimeo player at super HD. It's going to get crunched down into Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or something for a lot of this content now. So, one last look of where we are right now. So that really simple exercise, I think, reveals just a lot of what you can do in terms of animating things, using shape layers, using gradients, using noise, controlling your frame rates, that posterized time. And, you know, obviously like our design principles and, you know, emphasis and variety are important too. But just from an After Effects perspective, doing work like this should be really, really quick and easy. So we'll jump into the comments just for one moment. I like the 60 frame mode. Yeah, total aesthetic. Like some stuff looks awesome in 60, Matt. I was doing a ball bounce animation, like a little 2D flat layer ball, and I was doing it at 60 and it did look really good. Yes, Matt, on contrast, I'm just seeing it more and more. That was just experience of like delivering it to a client. By the time I see it on their Facebook page, I'm like, oh my gosh, look how washed out everything is. I think that's also why I've gotten so into like adding noise and stuff, which you have to be careful with on social and digital, but it's just a bummer to see like great looking 2D artwork look awesome in Illustrator, and by the time it's on Facebook, everything looks just totally washed and kind of shitty. So something to be aware of for sure. So these files are going to be available once the After Effects Foundations course is live on our campus site. We're not quite there yet, so just give us a few days on that. So now we're going to switch gears for our last half hour or so and talk a little bit about, let me come back here, this idea of transitions. I get asked quite a bit about explainer video stuff just because I've done so much of it. And I'm calling this, my cheat sheet for low budget explainers. Again, when you have this crazy time constraint, it's really good to simplify things, right? If it's like sub 10 grand, you barely be able to hire anybody else to help you. So the artwork typically needs to be simple. The animations are going to need to follow a pretty simple approach. So as I think of it, there's really only two types of transitions, up, down, left, right. Only 4 ways to kind of directionally exit a frame. To me, that's kind of all the same. I'm either going to like move everything up, move everything down, move everything to the left, move everything to the right, like a flat, get that thing out of here for the next shot. Then we have the zoom in, zoom out, right? I'm going to push into the scene, or I'm going to pull out of the scene to get to the next scene. For me, that's really the only 2 ways you can go about it, right? You're either going to push, pull, or you're going to wipe the screen. Assuming you're not hard cutting, right? Sometimes a hard cut is great, but let's talk about the transitions. Another big thing, anticipation and exaggeration, like going over the top with anticipation, I think is really important for simple stuff when you're trying to like hold longer screen time. That's the other thing about explainers, is they're typically always too long, and you push your clients to like, hey, it doesn't need to be 2 minutes. This could literally be 30 seconds and be, better, more poignant perhaps. But sometimes it's really long, and so sometimes I'm just throwing text in there. And so this text animation approach we'll try to talk about as well, where I really exaggerate these text transitions, because if it's just going to be text on screen for, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, like you really kind of, in my view, have to exaggerate stuff. And then generally what I call my 2-layer theory of animating these types of films, which is kind of a base layer of simple shapes, and then to act for transitions and morphs, and to just try to define what I mean by that. This was something I did. This is the classic example. If you're low budget explainer, we've got like a couple days to do the art, a couple days to do the animation. So what I mean by base layer is like that white square in the middle, right? So the square in the center is my base shape. Then that square becomes a rectangle. You see here, it's like, first we have this character and some icons, then the character needs to be sitting in a video player, right? So it go from that square to a rectangle. Then I'm going to do a zoom out, right? I'm going to pull everything back for this scene to get out of this scene. And then I turn that rectangle into a circular form, right? So it's like square, rectangle, circle. That's like the first thing I can go in and animate. And then that second layer, I'm saying, is all these details on top. The second layer would be like the red circles and the icons, right? Once I have that center base more figured out, then I can go back in and do the over-the-top stuff. So that's my like 2-layer theory. When I'm thinking about a scene or transitions, is how can I use a single shape and just morph it a few times, keeping it simple, but then go in and add my cool details over the top. So that's my kind of 2-layer theory of approaching stuff like this. Take the box layer under the circle. That's probably a little bit older comment. I don't know. So here's some text. So let's
capture is a boutique.
Oh gosh, let me turn off the old audio. Let me just delete that out of there. So there's that up transition. There's a logo that we're going to talk about. So that square becomes a rectangle, got stuff happening over the top. That becomes a circle, and we zoom out. So let's talk about what's going on here. Obviously, like a lot of simple stuff, and generally speaking, like animation principles and timing are super important. But everything here is really, really simple. So let's actually begin with, I actually just want to begin with this logo animation. And this logo animation, again, is going to bring us back to some concepts we were just looking at. Now, first of all, I had a copy of the client's logo in a vector format in Illustrator, and I exported it. It brought it into After Effects and then expanded it into an actual shape layer. Now, this was several years old, so I did that the manual way, where you like bring in a piece of After Effects art, double click, and then it'll bring up an option to say expand to shape layer. Now I highly recommend using Overlord from Atom Pluff to move between After Effects and Illustrator. It's truly just a stunning breakthrough in this workflow. As I said, I got a new computer. I don't have it set up here. But just for your reference, something worth investigating. I think it's 15, 20 bucks. But if you do this kind of work, it's just beyond worth it. So if we solo this out, the first thing we have is, let's just focus on the outline first, right? So that same kind of animation that I just showed you, where I have a trim path, I'm doing an end, a start-end animation. And then as we said, I never want to see that static edge. So I've got an offset, right? So that's very, very easy to do. The next thing we have is this box coming in. And again, start, end, and offset on the trim path. That's just another shape layer. So if we solo those two, this is where I started, right? I wanted to, because their full logo was actually like cut off in this boxy manner. So we needed to find a clever way to animate that. So again, same exact animation, start and offset. I never want to see those static ends, and that's really easy. But I also needed a way to then fill the animation, because this needs to be filled in white. So the next thing I did was come in here, simply duplicate the C outline and give it a fill, right? This layer just has a stroke at 3 pixels. This one has a fill, and you can mask on top of a shape layer, right? So if I come in here and grab my ellipse, let's say I wanted to recreate this mask, you're going to notice, and you need to really pay attention to this part, there's basically 2 settings. Every time you choose one of these, there's 2 settings, right? The first is Tool Creates Shape. The second is Tool Creates Mask. So if I have Tool Create Shapes selected, and I come in here to this layer and I start doing this, I'm not creating a mask, I'm creating a shape. That's not what I want, right? I actually want a mask. And since I already have a mask, let's set that to none just for the time being. So we selected create me a mask, and this allows me to do masking animations on top of a shape layer without needing to pre-comp the shape layer. I don't need to like move it into a pre-comp and move it out of my project here, which I don't want to do, right? I just want to keep everything really live and fluid. And so let's delete that one. So you can see here, this mask animation is obviously really important to this animation, where it's going to start filling up this direction. And then just, again, for me, it's like if there are multiple things moving in a scene, everything should feel like it's on the same arc, in my view, right? Like, the worst thing I tend to see in people's animations is it's just very like one thing happens, then the next thing happens, and it's very linear. I'd rather see these flowing, flourishing, multiple things happening, but giving me the same sense of energy and feeling like all the elements are connected. To me, that's like what the great animators and studios are really doing, is taking this complexity, but having things feel like they flourish, putting things on a really similar arc. So that's kind of the timing thinking here. So if we come back and just reveal everything, we'll see that clever little, I needed to just get it into the box. So how did we do that? What I did was I took the, you could duplicate the box, but I actually just, let's go ahead and solo this. Set this to add. So I need to take off Stencil Alpha so you can see what I'm doing here. I just have a layer that I created, and I put a mask on that layer, and I set the layer to Stencil Alpha. That means everything below it will have to exist inside this box. It's like a stencil, right? The stencil is the cutout part that makes it to the top of the stack, right? So Stencil Alpha is extremely, extremely useful. So as you can see, my Stencil Alpha is out wide. Let's actually bring everything back in so you can just see it. My Stencil Alpha is here, so I can see everything. But once I animate my stencil in, I only see what's everything, under the stack. I only see what's happening inside that stencil. So this is something I use basically constantly, because I wanted to get this really slick, smooth animation where you just kind of get these kind of almost rotational currents where the trim path comes from one direction, the wipe on comes from another direction. Again, everything feels kind of diagonal, just coming at it from angles. So again, that's just, I think, a good example of this idea of mattes, masking. The Stencil Alpha is very, very much in that same toolbox. So I wanted to focus in on this just for a moment so you could kind of see maybe a practical use of the Stencil Alpha, right? Whatever's under that stencil, we can kind of see through it. So there's like nothing going on in this scene other than really, really simple stuff. But I'm decently happy with how it came out there. So let's talk a little bit about this next part of it. Again, where I'm saying this 2-layer theory, right? I have this white box, and I did pre-compose it. Don't know if I would do that again. It must have made sense to me at the time. But the way that we can do these box kind of transformations with a shape layer is simply to toggle down the options, and we can unlink size. So, oops, excuse me. Opposite of that. So, just to do a very, very quick example, come in here, hold Shift Option Command, oops, hold Shift Option Command while I drag out to make it right in the center. Don't need a stroke. I do want a fill. I'm going to toggle down rectangle, and if you take a look at rectangle path, this is where we can get into our morphing. So let's say, okay, that's the first part of the animation. It's a square, and then very quickly, I need it to become a rectangle. So let's just go ahead and use our size. It's kind of like our video player scene. Easy ease. Put a little bit more. And since I separated the dimensions on the speed graph, just gonna have to deal with each one individually. Shouldn't be too tough. So I can go from square to rectangle, and then let's talk about that final transition out. So again, I'm gonna grab I'm going to grab my circular ellipse tool, and I'm going to say, give me a mask. And I'm going to come right to the center, and I'm going to make a really big mask so I can see everything. I'm going to double click to give myself a bounding box. I'm going to keep holding Shift Option Command, Shift Alt Command on a PC, I assume, and just go right to the edges. So that mask is just sitting there waiting, right? So let's say, you saw the progression, square, rectangle, and then let's say, okay, now we're getting to that end animation. I want to make this circular. And this is something I just did almost constantly. So we'll say mask path, come forward about 12 frames, double click, Shift Command Option, Shift Option Command, and bring that down. And I think it was one of my favorite things visually just to see rectangles and squares turn into circles in this way, using this really kind of simple masking. Ease those. Do this number here. And when you do a mask like so, oops, it's very often that it messes up your animation. If you try to get in here and you're like, oh, okay, I have to make this so small. To me, it would almost like mess up a lot of the interpolation that I was going for. So a lot of times I'll just cut layers, right? I'll just Option right bracket to cut that layer. And it's going to depend on the animation. It's actually more likely that on a transition like this, it's like slow in, fast out. So it's more like start pulling in slowly and then collapse. And that typically ends up looking a little bit better with a cut layer. And maybe we'll leave one more frame in there. So, a little bit of a timing issue. I'm going to grab everything, hold Alt, grab the last keyframe, and drag that animation out ever so slightly. Give it one more frame so we can just see, hopefully, a good example. So square, rectangle, circle transition. Go ahead and take one more look at this. Got my up transition, the logo that we discussed, square, rectangle. I've got all my top secondary elements, circle transition, and then I background circle, do a circle on that background as well. And that for me, I'm not using 3D, but this to me I would classify as like a zoom out animation that everything's pulling towards the center. And it's also something I love to do was make sure that my base layer, as we discussed, is like the simple shape. The second top layer is it's like the flourishes, the lines, the mouse, the shadow of the mouse, all this kind of animation, the cursor rather, all this kind of stuff. So for me, that is often how I try to solve transitional challenges. Hopefully that makes sense to you, this kind of idea of something that is simple that I know I can transform. It can really sit as the core of an animation. And then obviously all the stuff on top that we need, right? Like there's some story that's going on here. She's supposed to be in a video player, so we need all those top layers. So right, that's kind of like a zoom out. Okay, very quickly, I just want to talk about these text animations. And then we're going to get you all out of here because I know at 3, we've got this town hall over with School of Motion. So again, with tools like Overlord, you're not going to probably do this in the same way. But for me, I used to take text in Illustrator, expand it out into individual layers. So I literally have every single layer with its own letter. Every single letter with its own layer, excuse me. And I actually really like working this way because it allows me to just have a lot more control on the fly. And I've just gotten quite used to labeling my words. So like this first word, we're, like even the kind of apostrophe has its own layer there. So I'll typically like put each word, and you can see I'm offsetting each word. And what I did was I just started by grabbing everything and doing the same animation to get them on the screen, where they scale up and they move their position up one by one. So each letter is getting its own animation. Then I cut all the layers to do my outro transition. And I typically will do that as opposed to keeping everything on a single layer. I tend to like to cut, like whenever there's a hold on the text, to me that's a good opportunity to cut those text layers, and then I'll worry about my transition on the back end. And when I mention like extreme exaggeration, this like that kind of extreme exaggeration of taking each letter, each word way down, so we call that anticipation, right? Like we know that the movement, the transition is going to go screen top, so we go way down and up. And I got into the habit of doing this quite a bit. As a lot of these explainer videos, if it's 2 minutes long, there's going to be text in there, and it tends to, just a screen like this is not a great looking shot, but it was what I needed for this 5.5 second increment here. And as you can see, those little red lines, same kind of idea that we did before, a shape layer, animating the start and end, and animating the offset. And that's typically how I do that there. So we're going to make this available as well on the website. So Battle Axe. Oh, thank you, Matt. Thank you for linking up Battle Axe. How do you know all of this? Did you do this in school? I did not do this in school. I did not go to school for this. My background was in 3D character animation. I did a program called Animation Mentor, who MoGraph Mentor was really built as an homage to Animation Mentor for 3D character animators in Maya. And that was my background. But Andrew Kramer, Nick Campbell, just like a lot of us, right? Like all the training was just so abundant on the internet as it is now. And so 12-ish years later, it's like, yeah, I can do this kind of simple 2D work. So I appreciate all the kind comments. Thank you. I do appreciate you all hanging out today. If you want to go join the School of Motion Town Hall starting in 5 minutes, you can probably find that link on Twitter. Thank you all for coming to hang out. We're going to continue this series. As you saw in my outline, we've got quite a bit more to talk about in After Effects. I really think there's a simple, easy way, if you're new to After Effects, to just get some basic core skills. And so next time, I do want to get more into a little bit more on kind of the distortion stuff, the 2.5D compositing, and then building your own simple rigs for 2D. So I'll hang out for just a few minutes if there's any questions. We've got a new course out, our new Blender training course, 3D modeling from Paul McMahon. We just put out, people seem to really be learning a lot from Paul. Paul's such a natural teacher. Remington's fantastic too if you're in the Blender world. Because of the craziness, we were running a spring sale for 40% off. So if you want to grab a course, if you can focus your mind on that, I know it's really hard right now, then it's a good time to just enroll in that and just kind of hang on to it. But the After Effects Foundations, we're going to keep putting this together and make that free. We're trying to come up with better free onboarding kind of training for people going into the MoGraph Mentor program. And enrollment for the program is going to start again up April 1st. So if you're interested in the super deep dive on becoming a motion designer and having a mentor, 2-3 hours a week for 3 months, then that's that program over at mographmentor.com. Please do stay healthy, everybody. Stay safe. I know we've probably got people all over the world tuning into this, and I really do appreciate you all spending some time with us today. Wash your hands. We'll all just take care of the people around us and get through this, and hopefully we can go back one day to just fully focusing on this fun art and design work. I know a lot of people are potentially even struggling with work, projects getting canceled. If you're in our MoGraph Mentor Slack, we started a jobs channel. If you want to get into the MoGraph Mentor Slack, just go sign up for one of our free courses, the Photoshop Illustrator 101, the Motion Design 101, stuff like that. And then you can just jump in there if you want to post jobs that you know about or that you're looking for work actively. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows how bad this recession is going to be? Hopefully this is just a temporary halt. But I know a lot of advertising budgets are probably getting slashed right now because of the uncertainty. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great Tuesday. Try to get some work done. If you're going to go do the town hall with our friends at School of Motion, that's going to start here in a couple minutes. And hopefully, we can get some great insight from their amazing team as well. So thank you, everybody. Again, I'm Michael Jones. This is with MoGraph Mentor. Thank you so much for hanging out. And we will see you next time. We'll put out some alerts on the next one, probably next week at the same time, but we'll see what the schedule looks like. Thanks, everybody. God bless. Stay healthy.